Welcome to Madlik. My name is Jeffrey Stern, and at Madlik, we light a spark or shed some light on a Jewish text or tradition. We also host a weekly disruptive Torah discussion on Clubhouse every Thursday evening at 8 p.m. Eastern. Today, along with Rabbi Adam Mintz, we explore Jacob's name and career path and struggle with his twice stolen blessing. I'm broadcasting live from the Negev in Israel, so join me in the desert as we explore stealing your blessings. So welcome. Another week of disruptive Torah. And as I said, I am in the Negev, and I've been talking to my buggy mates as we dune buggied across the desert, and my camping mates about the Parsha. So you are going to get some very Israeli and secular Israeli, cultural Israeli insights into this Parsha that I am very, very excited to share with you. So, as I said in the intro, we're really going to focus on the personality that is scripted for Yaakov, known in English as Jacob. And the personality and the career path that he has starts from the first moment of his birth. In Genesis 25:26, it says, "Then his brother emerged," because he was twins with a guy named Esau, "and his brother emerged holding on to the heel of Esau. So they named him Jacob." Yaakov comes from the word Yaakov, which means heel. So right from the beginning, from the moment he was born, there is this relationship with Esau, clearly, but it's a special relationship because unlike Achilles, whose heel also plays a major role in his life, at least it's his heel. In the case of Yaakov, he gets his characterization by grabbing on to his brother's heel. And then, of course, as we talked about in the pre-party, there's two stolen blessings, and we're not going to really get into all the details about how the blessings were stolen, mostly because we all know the story. The first stealing of the blessing, and I'm saying that in quotes because I'm going to ask the rabbi in a second whether he feels, in fact, that they were stolen. But the first episode is when Esau, who's a hunter, very vibrant, comes home after being out in the fields, and sees a pot of lentils, red lentils, on the table that Yaakov is about to eat, and he just says, "I could die for those lentils." And sure enough, Yaakov takes advantage of the situation, and he says, "Well, no problem. I will sell you these lentils for the birthright," because he was ultimately the second-born child. He came out second, grabbing onto that heel. And Esau went ahead and said, "Sure, not a problem." Fast forward to later on in the Parsha, we know the second episode, which is where Yaakov dresses up in a garment that makes him feel, smell, taste like his brother, and he goes to his father, who is blind, and he impersonates his brother and gets the blessing in that way. So let me stop here and ask you, Rabbi, and anyone in the audience, do you feel that these blessings were actually stolen? And if they were they stolen twice or just once? What's the deal?
Okay. First of all, Jeffrey, it's so nice that you're able to do this all the way from the Negev. And I look forward to the perspective that you're going to share from your friends who you're with. I think the simple reading of the text is that the blessings are stolen once. It's only the second time, the story with Jacob dressing up like Esau with his and his father being blind. That was trickery. The first time, he took advantage of a situation. I don't think we would say that that's dishonest. He took advantage of a situation. Esav should have been more careful. But I think it's an interesting question what the relationship is between the first story about the soup and the second story about stealing the blessings. Does Jacob feel as if he's legit in taking the blessings because he bought them from Esav? The Torah never says that exactly. Does the Torah mean that? Is that supposed to be understood? So I'm not quite sure. So your question's a good question. I don't think he stole them twice, but I think there is a fair question about what the relationship is between story A and story B.
So, as I said in the intro, I've been camping in the desert of the Negev. And as any of you who are campers or have seen Blazing Saddles will know, that campers do end up eating beans into the trip. And so sure enough, one night we were served beans this week. And I said, what's the connection between beans and this week's parsha with Yaakov and Esav? And the Israeli says, well, there is an expression, and it's called Nazid Adashim. And Nazid Adashim is the opposite of something that I was aware of, which is ona'ah. You're not allowed to charge too much for something by biblical law. Nazid Anashim is when you buy something for much, much less than it's worth. So if you go ahead and Google that, you'll see in Wikipedia, two examples from literature of how these words are used. So one example is the guy had to sell an interest in his company for a lot less than it was worth. Mamash Nazid Adashim. It was really a case of these beans. So from the Hebrew vernacular of modern-day Hebrew, I think it's pretty clear whether it was actual stealing or gross taking advantage of a situation. It certainly was not something that, if anything, we would put on a pedestal and say, this is the way we want to live our lives. Even if you look at the prophets, like Jeremiah, says in 9:3, beware every man of his friend, turn not even a brother, for every brother takes advantage, every friend is base in his dealings. And the words that he uses for every brother takes advantage is kol ach akov Yaakov v'kol re'ah Rachel yehalech. So here you have both modern day Hebrew and the prophets themselves that clearly, Jeremiah is in the business of bringing the Jews back to proper behavior. And clearly the reference is to a Yaakov, but it's even deeper than that. It's almost his vernacular way of saying, the brothers should not take care of brothers and they shouldn't be grabbing the heels. So I do believe that both traditional Jewish texts and the way the story is carried on in modern Israeli culture, the premise is that Yaakov did not do a good thing. That's for sure. Whether it was outright stealing or crass taking advantage of his brother is up for grabs. But before you respond, Rabbi, or anyone in the audience, what I would like to add to my question is, what sort of a name is it for parents to give their child, or if you want to look at it as literature, the author of our holy text to give to one of our patriarchs a name that ultimately means heel, or a heel grabber? It's so strange. Rabbi, this Shabbat, you're going to be talking about what did Isaac see in Esav, who was out there hunting and earning a living. But what did he see and his wife see in their son that they would give him such a name? There's literally nothing nice you can say about using the word Yaakov, which could mean crooked. It could mean, when armies attack from the rear, they attack. The word that is used is attacking the heel, the Ekev, and we all know what Amalek is hated for. It attacked the rear of the Jewish people. Rabbi, what do you make of this, and how could anybody call their child Yaakov?
It's a fantastic question. The simple answer to the question, of course, is that Yaakov held on to the heel of Esav when they were born. So it actually he was named after an event that took place in his life. Now, that doesn't answer your question because it's still not a good name, but at least you can explain where it comes from. But I think you have to know something. They always ask the question, the book of Ruth, the sons, the husband of Ruth and the husband of her sister-in-law Orpah, their names are Machlon and Kilion. Machlon means disease, and Kilion means destruction. And you have the same question, Jeffrey, and that is, how in the world could you name your kids disease and destruction? And I think the answer they give is that in the Bible, the names are not always names that were given by parents at the birth of the children. Sometimes it's the Bible giving these names to these people, reflecting what their life was about. They want you to identify these people. So Machlon and Kilion were bad guys. They died young. So they're called Machlon and Kilion. And Yaakov, interestingly enough, if we take this view, the Torah wants us to know that he was a very complicated guy and that he basically made his way by being cunning. It's not only this week, Jeffrey. Next week he's going to do exactly the same thing, except with his father-in-law Lavan. When he has this kind of very strange way in which he's able to take the flock of Lavan. Now, he's also someone who is tricked, because next week Laban tricks him and gives him the one daughter rather than the other daughter. So Yaakov lives a life of trickery. And if we understand, like the verse in Jeremiah, that the word really means trickery, that's the way we remember Jacob, as someone who lived a very complicated life. He's the first one of the forefathers who actually his life is not straight. His life is very, very crooked, back and forth and back. And I think it's our job to try to figure out, what do we think about this guy, Jacob? We're named after him, by the way. Bnei Yisrael, the children of Israel. We're named after Jacob. But interestingly, just on your point, we're not called Bnei Yaakov. We're called Bnei Yisrael. I don't think that's a mistake. Right? They don't want to call us Bnei Yaakov. Bnei Yisrael, the word sarita, means either to struggle or to be victorious over. That's a much better name than Bnei Yaakov.
So I think, if I can interpret what you're saying a little bit, is, first of all, yes, there are many instances where names in the Bible foreshadow what is to come. And if what is to come is not that pretty, you might get a name like Boaz's daughters that you referenced. Of course, that begs the question here a little bit, because, as you say, Yaakov is our patriarch. We are the children of Yaakov. So this is not a side character, or you could certainly not say that Yaakov is the bad guy in this story. The story continues from him. So I would like to suggest that maybe his name foreshadows a name change. And of course, we all know that Yaakov evolves into Israel. And that becomes kind of an interesting dynamic here. Do you think there's any thought to that where one needs to grow into a name? I mean, if we look at Yaakov as the one who follows the crooked path, the schemer, the conniver, the one who basically has to claw his way up by his bootstraps. And then we look maybe till next the future portion where he fights with the angel and he wins and gets a new name. Maybe in his case, he's foreshadowing this change in terms of whether it's his parents or, if we look at it from a literary point of view, the author of the story. Do you think there's any basis there?
I'm sure there's basis there. This week's portion and next week's portion are Jacob the conniver. Jacob's name is changed 2 weeks from now in Vayishlach. By then, he's done conniving. He meets his brother Esav, right, when they're both older and successful, and they actually have a confrontation. I mean, it doesn't turn out to be a bad confrontation, but they have a confrontation. There's no more of the conniving in Jacob. He is someone who goes out and he has the self-confidence to have a confrontation with his brother. So I think that there's no question that Jacob evolves, develops into Israel, and we're named after Jacob with the name Israel. And that's the Jacob who has 12 sons and 1 daughter. That's the Jacob who goes down to Egypt. That's the Jacob who basically is able to reconcile his family. And we're going to have plenty of weeks to talk about that. That's a very interesting idea. And that is that Jacob might have been responsible for the fact that the family split apart, that he favored Joseph. But in the end, it's Jacob who brings the family together. And it's a nice story because at the very end of the book of Genesis, we have the story that everybody is there around Jacob when he passes away, because he's able to bring everybody together. So the story of Jacob, and in a very straightforward way, he's not the conniver anymore. He's very deliberate and very straightforward. So it might just be that the second half of the book of Genesis is the development of the character of Jacob.
So I think you're absolutely correct in terms of if you look at the book of Genesis, you get that resolution at the end for sure. But what I would love to do is maybe we're being a little harsh on Jacob, on Yaakov. Maybe looking at Yaakov's need and ability to work the system, work around the system, to break a few rules, to get where he needs to be. Maybe it's not all Jacob. Maybe there's a theme here that Jacob is meant to open our eyes to. And so when I started thinking along those lines, I started thinking of Abraham and Isaac, the parents. Both of them either went down to Egypt or went down to another place when there was a famine. And for whatever reason, both of them lied about the relationship with their wife. Abraham had a beautiful wife. He was afraid that he would be killed if it was known that that was his wife. And he said, "It's my sister." And again, so now I'm kind of sensitized to, we've talked before about the fact that Abraham with Lech Lecha and is a wanderer comes from the other side of the track, so to speak, and that's where the word Ivri comes from, me'ever. But maybe we haven't focused enough on the more pathetic side of being a wanderer. Maybe we have looked at it as too heroic, and maybe what this Parsha is making us do, and what Yaakov is making us do, is to understand a little more the pathos of being that wanderer, that stateless person, that one who has to land on his 2 feet and try to get a grave for his wife by without any leverage, talking to the locals, the landowners, so to speak, and has to lie about the relationship with his wife, which has to be the most emasculating thing that a person could do. And then I came across a beautiful verse in Isaiah 40. It actually comes from the Haftorah that we say after Tisha B'Av called Nachamu. And in it has a verse, and it says, "Let every valley be raised, and every hill and mountain made low. Let the rugged ground become level, and the ridges become plain." And you guessed it right if you guessed that my buddy who was driving the dune buggy with me, we started talking about crooked roads and bumpy roads, and he brought up this verse and a book by Agnon that I'll get to in a second. But even if you look at this verse, when it says that he makes the ground level, it says, "V'haya ha'akov lemishur." The word for crooked ground is that old word we've been talking about, this akov. And the Midrash has an amazing interpretation of this path, of this story. Of course, Isaiah is giving kind of Nachamu, he's giving strength, he's consoling the Jewish people, he's talking about the future, and he's going to say that in the future, things are going to be straight, the road is going to be flat. And the Midrash says that, yes, not only that, but unlike when you left Egypt and you went to Pharaoh and you said, "Hey, Pharaoh, we need to go to the desert to pray to our Lord." And you literally had to lie the first or second time when you were talking to Pharaoh about what you really wanted to do. "We want national independence. We are human beings." No, you made up a little white lie. And the Midrash says that in the future, in the final redemption, we're not going to have to lie anymore. We can take the straight path. So it really kind of brought it clear in front of my eyes that we're looking at this theme of knowingly knowing that we as people, and we have a mythology of having to do that corner cutting and having to grovel and having to break a few rules. And this theme is more than just Yaakov. Does that resonate with you at all, Rabbi?
It does resonate with me. I'm waiting to hear the rest. Yes, that does resonate with me.
So the rest is that the guy who I'm driving with says, and you have to read a book by Agnon, and the book is called V'haya ha'akov lemishur, and the crooked shall be made straight. And through modern technology, I have my Kindle with me. I'm in a tent. I'm able to download, unfortunately, only an English translation of this work. And that's
fantastic.
And it's an amazing story about a guy and his wife who are childless, who own a store in Eastern Europe, a hardware store, and all of a sudden, like Job, everything goes wrong. The local nobleman favors another retailer, so he raises their rent. Once the rent goes up, their taxes go up. Shortly after, they go bankrupt. And now the hero of our story, a guy named Menashe Chaim, has to make a decision. And the decision is he's going to go to other towns and he's going to become a schnorrer. And in his mind, becoming a schnorrer, a fundraiser for himself, is close to stealing. And one of the stories that he tells is in the name of the Rebbe of Kachnitz, and it's called the golden thief, not golden, but golden, because this thief went to his Rebbe, and this chassid went to his Rebbe, and he says, I'm just not making it. I can't make ends meet. And so the Rebbe says, you know what you need to do? You would be a fantastic thief. So he goes out, and this is a Hasidic story, and he starts, he says, I need a golden once a week. It's like a shekel. It's like a pound to survive. So he breaks into stores. He breaks into homes. He opens up the safe. The safe could be full of hundreds of thousands of dollars. He takes out one golden. And it's a long story, but in a sense, what it's doing is it's talking about stealing in a way that is very simpatico. You feel for this thief. And there are many different little side stories in the book, and I assure you that if you read it, you will love every minute of it. But the most fascinating story is that when he leaves his town, he goes to his rabbi to get a letter saying that this man is very righteous, so he can use this letter to fundraise, to schnorr. And he's a bashful young guy, and he just finds it's difficult to use this letter, and he's really a loser. And at every turn, he's losing money. And finally, he meets another beggar in a tavern. And the other beggar says to him, well, why are you doing so badly? And he shows him the letter, and the other beggar says, listen, I'll buy that letter off of you because you don't know how to use it. I know how to use it. I can make a lot of money with that letter. So he sells him the letter. He now has money in his pocket. He gets drunk. The guy who bought the letter thinks he's going to be rich, and he gets drunk. The only problem is the beggar who has the letter dies. So now he dies with this letter in his pocket saying that he is Menashe Chaim and he's a good guy. Well, his wife, right. Menashe Chaim's wife, has been waiting at home, and now she hears that her husband has died. So she goes to the rabbi, and the rabbi says, well, you have the letter, so you can say that he died. And she gets remarried. Now Menashe Chaim is coming back to town.
Come back.
He comes back, and no one recognizes him, and he talks to a beggar, and the beggar says, oh, I'm off to the circumcision of the child born to this woman who was your wife. But of course he doesn't say was your wife. And right. Now he realizes he has to leave town because if he becomes a parent, that will ruin his wife's life. And the child will become a bastard. So he goes to start sleeping in the cemetery because he wants to die. And the cemetery man starts putting together this beautiful gravestone. And he comes and looks at it, and his name is on it. And it turns out his wife says, I want a beautiful gravestone for my first husband. And so you can imagine if what Agnon does, in my mind, is he parallels the story, as you were saying before, Rabbi, where Yaakov cheated his brother Esav. What comes around goes around. Next week we'll find when he goes to Lavan, he's cheated. But you literally have the sale of the kind of this letter, very reminiscent of the porridge. It is absolutely fascinating, but at the end of the day, what one is left with is this sense of what it was like to live as a minority without a golden to scratch together, begging for your life. And there was nothing heroic about it, but it was who we were. And it makes you look at this whole story from a whole different perspective, and you start to wonder, maybe 200 years ago, they read this story much differently. Maybe they saw in Yaakov themselves. And that was the question I was left with after reading the book. I just looked at the whole story totally differently.
So that, first of all, thank you for sharing the book and the story. And it's amazing that there in the Negev, you discovered this book and you read the book. I love the whole background. But you know, that is so interesting to say that we see ourselves as Jacob. And really, Jeffrey, the sermon that you're giving is, do we see ourselves as Jacob or do we see ourselves as Israel? Which name do we see ourselves? And that we're called the children of Israel. But maybe depending on when you lived and what the situation was and how difficult it was, maybe we get comfort in the fact that we're the sons, the descendants of Jacob, that we know how to, I think the word they use today is operate in a very hostile world.
And I think, and what goes with that is, so profound because, nowadays we talk about people who are victimized or who have a sense of being a victim. And of course that gets back to the part of the story that we talked about of foreshadowing a name change. How do you kind of respect and understand the pathos of the Yaakov and still be able to see the Israel as the ideal, the successful person who can stand on his 2 feet? How do you get around making the Yaakov the heel grabber, something that you can kind of sympathize with, understand both in yourself and in others, without making it into a model? That to me was a fascinating part of this story as well. I must say that the other thing that came to mind is I loved a thinker called Isaiah Berlin, and he wrote a book called The Crooked Timber of Humanity, and it was taken from a saying of Immanuel Kant, who believed all morality was perfect. But the concept was that we are human, and being human dictates what ultimately the outcomes are. In Kohelet, Ecclesiastes, it says, consider God's doing. Who can straighten what he has twisted? And so I think part of it also is this recognition of who we are. And the direction that Isaiah Berlin took it was that he grew up in an age where communism and Nazism and all of these isms, these ideals, were literally responsible for the deaths of millions of people. And his concept was that if the timber of humanity is crooked, then making it straight, making some sort of ideal which has no basis in the matter-of-fact nature of our lives, of our trivial lives and pathetic needs, makes no sense. And his concept was get rid of the ideals and think of the practical things that you can do, and more importantly, understand that there might not be a resolution to every question, and that there might be more than one sides. Ultimately, that life can be murky, and that we all might be heel grabbers.
I mean, both though. I mean, if you go from Agnon to Isaiah Berlin, and what you see really is that this idea of the need to sometimes be a heel grabber and to gain comfort in the fact that one of our ancestors was a heel grabber is an extremely powerful idea. And I think just as we reach 8:30, I think, Jeffrey, that you really you put this in perspective. I think we always start by saying we're the children of Israel, and I think by sharing the Agnon story and sharing Isaiah Berlin's insight, I think what we really see is it's not so simple. And Yaakov's life was not so simple. And the way we look back and we associate with those lives is not so simple. And that being a heel grabber is not necessarily something that we need to be ashamed of. But, different situations require different kinds of reactions. So that's fascinating. And I look forward, Jeffrey, to next week continuing our conversation. We'll talk about Vayetze. We're going to continue our conversation about Jacob's life. So Shabbat Shalom. You're going to get to Shabbat before we will. But Shabbat Shalom. Enjoy the Negev. Enjoy Toldot in the Negev. And Shabbat Shalom to everybody. We look forward to seeing you next Thursday night at 8 p.m. to discuss Parshat Vayetze.
Thank you so much, Rabbi. Shabbat Shalom to everybody. And please know that this was recorded and it will be published as a podcast. And it will include a Sephira source sheet, so you can go ahead and look at all the sources. But forget about all that and run out and buy that book by Agnon. It is amazing, and it's called "And the Crooked Shall Be Made Straight." Shabbat Shalom to you all.
Shabbat Shalom. Bye-bye.